The bag wasn't supposed to be there. That was the first thing Owen noticed. Not the money inside it, not the broken zipper along the side, not even the weight of it when he picked it up. Just the wrongness of it. A black leather duffel sitting at the base of a parking meter on King Street West in Hamilton, Ontario, on a Tuesday morning in February, with snow coming down in that flat, indifferent way it does when it's not really trying. No one around. A coffee cup skidding across the sidewalk in the wind, and this bag just sitting there like someone had set it down for a second and forgotten to come back. Owen Marsh was 38 years old. He worked demolition, interior gutting, mostly, the kind of job that left white dust in the creases of his knuckles no matter how long he scrubbed. He had a 6-year-old daughter named Lily. No, not Lily. He'd named her Penny after his mother, who had died the winter before Penny was born and never got to see her. It was the kind of detail that sounds like something from a movie, except it wasn't. It was just his life. He was walking to his truck at 7:40 in the morning, thermos in one hand, work gloves stuffed in his coat pocket. He almost stepped over the bag. Almost. But his boot caught the strap and he stumbled, and when he looked down properly and saw the zipper had given way just enough to show the edge of something green, that particular unmistakable green, he stopped. He looked up the street, looked down. A streetcar was grinding past on the tracks half a block away. A woman in a red parka was walking a dog in the opposite direction, not looking at him. He crouched down beside the bag and pulled the zipper open another inch. The money was bundled in rubber bands. Stacked. Not loose, not scattered, organized, like someone had counted it and packed it with care. Owen sat back on his heels in the snow and felt something cold move through him that had nothing to do with the temperature. He didn't count it on the street. He picked the bag up, carried it to his truck, put it on the passenger seat, and sat there with the engine idling and the heat blowing, and his hands on the steering wheel. Then he unzipped the bag all the way. $82,000. He knew because he counted it 3 times. Each time he got the same number. He sat there for 11 minutes. He watched the clock, and he thought about Penny. She'd been diagnosed 8 months ago, a condition called FSGS, focal segmental glomerulosclerosis, which is a disease of the kidneys that sounds like something you'd read in a textbook and never expect to encounter in your actual daughter, your 6-year-old who still slept with a stuffed polar bear she'd named Gerald, and who had recently become obsessed with collecting smooth rocks from the escarpment trail near their house. The disease meant medications that cost more than Owen made in a week. It meant specialist appointments in Toronto every 6 weeks. It meant his ex-wife, Sandra, calling him every month to talk about numbers. Not as a reproach. She wasn't like that, but because the numbers were real and they both had to face them. Owen had been behind on rent for 4 months. Not dangerously behind. His landlord, a Portuguese man named Eduardo who had known Owen's father, had been patient. But patient had a limit. Eduardo had said as much gently over the phone the previous Friday. "Owen, I need something by the end of the month. Something, you understand?" He understood. $82,000. He sat in the truck and he thought, no one saw me pick it up. He thought, there's no ID in here, no wallet, no note. He thought, Penny's next medication refill is $340 and I have $67 in my account. And then he thought about his father. His father, Ray Marsh, had been a plumber for 31 years in Hamilton, a man who wore the same boots for a decade and fixed things instead of replacing them and believed. With a stubbornness that Owen had sometimes found infuriating, and now found impossible to argue with, that the way you behaved when no one was watching was the only true measure of a person. Ray had died 4 years ago. Heart attack, fast, no warning. And Owen had stood at the graveside in the rain thinking about all the conversations they hadn't finished yet. He zipped the bag closed. He called his work site and told them he'd be an hour late. Then he drove to the Hamilton police station on King William Street and walked inside. The desk officer was a woman named Constable Firth, who had the kind of face that had seen everything and was mildly suspicious of everyone as a result. Owen set the bag on the counter and said, "I found this on King Street West this morning. There's money in it. A lot of money." Constable Firth looked at the bag. looked at Owen, the work coat, the dust on his collar, the thermos he was still holding because he hadn't thought to put it down. She looked back at the bag. "How much money?" she said. $82,000. She wrote something on a form. She asked him for his name, his address, his phone number. She asked him to describe exactly where he'd found it and at what time. She told him that the department would log it as found property, that an investigation would be opened, and that if no owner came forward within 90 days, he might be entitled to the funds depending on provincial regulations. She didn't say thank you. She didn't say anything else, really. Owen walked back to his truck and drove to work and spent 8 hours knocking out a kitchen in a century home in Dundas, and he told no one what he'd done. He didn't tell Sandra when she texted him that evening about Penny's next specialist appointment. He didn't tell his co-worker Bram, who would have thought he was an idiot. And probably not entirely wrong. He didn't tell Eduardo when he called to say he needed another 2 weeks. He just went home, put Penny to bed. She wanted 3 stories, and then a 4th because the 3rd one ended on a note she found unsatisfying. And he sat at his kitchen table in the dark and drank a beer and felt, if he was being honest, mostly okay. Not good. He wasn't delusional, but okay. The woman who had dropped the bag was named Vivienne Clark. Owen didn't know that yet. He wouldn't know it for a while. What he knew was what appeared on the local news 3 days later. A brief item, almost an afterthought, between a story about road closures on the Link and a piece about a new development proposal in Stony Creek. A spokesperson for the Hamilton police said that a significant sum of cash had been turned in by a citizen and that the department was working to locate the owner. No name given. No amount specified. What the news item didn't say. And what Owen had no way of knowing was that Vivienne Clark had been watching that broadcast from a hotel room on the 8th floor of the Sheraton Centre in Toronto, where she was staying during the 3rd week of a 12-week restructuring process that was quietly dismantling the company her father had built, and that she had spent 16 years growing into something her father never imagined it could become. Clark Industries, logistics, supply chain management, 3 distribution centers in Ontario and 1 in Alberta. 240 employees, most of them in Hamilton and Mississauga. Vivienne was 51 years old, and she was, by any measure that the financial press cared about, extraordinarily successful. She was also, at that particular moment, sitting on the edge of a hotel bed in a bathrobe, eating a room service Caesar salad, and feeling like she hadn't actually spoken to another human being. Really spoken, not transacted, in longer than she could remember. The $82,000 had been in a bag she'd left in the back of a hired car 3 weeks earlier. It was cash she'd withdrawn to pay a former business partner, a debt that had existed in a gray area between the personal and the professional for almost a decade. The kind of debt that's easier to resolve quietly, in cash, without accountants involved. She had called the car company. She had called the driver. She had filed a report with Toronto police, who had no record of the bag and no interest in the gray area context of the cash. She had written the money off. When her assistant forwarded her the Hamilton news item with a question mark in the subject line, Vivienne read it twice. Then she read it again. Then she called the Hamilton police non-emergency line herself and identified herself and confirmed that yes, the cash was almost certainly hers, and no, she was not prepared to go into detail about its origin over the phone. The officer on the line told her she'd need to come in and provide documentation. She drove to Hamilton the next morning. Constable Firth was not the officer who processed Vivienne's claim, but she was at the front desk when Vivienne came in, and she was there later when Owen was called back to the station to confirm some details. And she watched, with the mild interest of someone who had in fact seen everything, as these 2 people existed briefly in the same room without knowing anything significant about each other. The officer handling the case, a young man named Sergeant Kowalski, took them through the formalities separately. Owen confirmed where he'd found the bag and when. Vivienne confirmed the amount and provided a bank withdrawal receipt that accounted for the sum. The bag was returned to her. Owen was thanked for his civic honesty, which was the phrase Sergeant Kowalski actually used. And Owen nodded and said it wasn't a big deal and meant it, or mostly meant it. He was almost at the door when Vivienne caught up to him. She'd had to ask Kowalski for his name first. "Mr. Marsh," she said. Owen turned. He didn't know who she was. She was a woman in a good coat, charcoal wool, well cut, with dark hair going silver at the temples and the kind of composure that looks effortless until you look more carefully and see the effort underneath it. "That's me," he said. She seemed to consider something for a moment. Then she said, "Thank you. For what you did." Owen shrugged, which was what he did when he didn't know what else to do. "It wasn't mine," he said. "Didn't seem right to keep it." She looked at him for a moment like he'd said something in a language she used to speak but hadn't used in a long time. "No," she said finally. "I suppose it didn't." And Owen nodded and went out to his truck. That would have been the end of it. Except that Vivienne sat in her car in the police station parking lot for 20 minutes, which she later could not fully explain. She told herself she was answering emails. She was answering emails. That part was true. But she was also watching Owen Marsh's truck, which was parked 3 spots over and had a cracked side mirror and a tragically hip sticker on the back bumper that was so old it had faded to near white. She was thinking about the fact that he'd found $82,000 in cash, with no identification attached, in a public place and had walked it into a police station at 7:40 in the morning before his workday started. She was thinking about why a person does that. She was not, she told herself, following him when she pulled out of the lot 4 minutes after he did. She was going back to the highway. The on-ramp was in that direction. This was a coincidence of geography, except that she didn't take the on-ramp. She drove behind him, at a distance, not creepily. She hoped, for about 6 blocks until he turned into a neighborhood of post-war semis and small yards and tall bare maples, and pulled into the driveway of a house that needed new eaves and had a bike with training wheels on the front porch. And she drove past and kept going and felt, for the first time in several years, genuinely embarrassed about her own behavior. She went back to Toronto. She did not forget about him. This was the part Vivienne found hardest to explain to herself. She was in the middle of a restructuring process. She had board calls at 7 a.m. and creditor calls at 9 and HR calls at noon, and she was doing all of this while maintaining the public composure that was required of her, because 49 of her 240 employees were in Hamilton. And if word got out that the company was in serious difficulty, she'd lose people before she had a chance to stabilize things. She had actual, serious, large problems occupying every available hour of her day. And yet, she'd asked her assistant quietly to find out what he could about Owen Marsh of Hamilton. Not intrusively, just publicly available information. She told herself she wanted to know if there was something she could do, as a practical matter, to express gratitude. A gift card seemed absurd. A check felt presumptuous. But something. What her assistant found was not very remarkable, on its face. Owen Marsh, 38, sole proprietor of a small demolition and renovation company operating out of Hamilton. Licensed and insured, generally positive reviews. 1 daughter, Penelope, 6, mother listed as Sandra Marsh, currently residing in Burlington. And then, in a local Hamilton news archive, a brief item from 8 months ago. A community fundraiser for a child with a rare kidney disease, with a photo of a man who was very clearly Owen, standing behind a little girl with his hands on her shoulders, and a look on his face that Vivienne had to stop looking at, because it did something uncomfortable to her chest. The fundraiser had raised $4,000. $4,000 for a disease that cost. She looked it up. Tens of thousands annually in ongoing management, sometimes more. She closed her laptop. She opened it again. She closed it again. The call came from an unexpected direction. Vivienne had a cousin named Gerald. No relation to the stuffed polar bear, who worked in community investment at a provincial health foundation. And she called him that evening, under the pretense of a family check-in, which neither of them was fooled by. She told him, obliquely, that she had come across a situation involving a child with a serious kidney condition and a parent who was managing without much support, and she asked him what the landscape looked like for assistance. Gerald told her about the Trillium drug program, which she already knew about. He told her about a pediatric foundation he knew personally that offered direct financial assistance grants for families dealing with rare pediatric conditions, and gave her a name to call. He told her, with the gentle directness of someone who knows you well enough to be honest, that if she was thinking about doing something herself, she should think carefully about how she did it, because people in hard situations had dignity and it mattered how you approached it. "I know that," Vivienne said. "I know you know it," Gerald said. "I'm saying it anyway." Owen found out his daughter's condition had deteriorated on a Thursday in March. The specialist in Toronto, a quiet, thorough woman named Dr. Pham, showed him the latest results and explained them carefully, and Owen sat in the office chair across from her and nodded at the appropriate moments, and didn't say much, because he had found that when things were very bad, he tended to go very quiet, like something in him was bracing. The short version was that Penny's kidneys were showing more stress than they'd hoped. The medication protocol needed to be adjusted. There was a treatment option, a newer biologic drug that had shown meaningful improvement in pediatric FSGS cases in recent trials. It was not yet fully covered. The out-of-pocket cost before any assistance programs were applied was significant. Owen drove back to Hamilton on the 403 in the dark and stopped at a Tim Hortons in Ancaster and ordered a large coffee he didn't drink and just sat in a booth for a while, watching the highway through the window. He called Sandra. She already knew. Dr. Pham had called her too. They talked for 40 minutes, which was longer than they usually talked, and at the end of it they had a plan that was mostly held together with hope, which was not ideal, but it was what they had. He drove home. Penny was at Sandra's that night. The house was quiet. He sat in the kitchen again, in the same chair, and thought about what he'd done in February, and whether it had been the right thing, and whether it mattered either way. He decided it did, not because anything good had come of it. Nothing materially good had come of it, but because it was the kind of thing his father would have done, and he didn't know any other way to be. The letter arrived 12 days later. It came on Clark Industries' letterhead, which meant nothing to Owen because he didn't know who Clark Industries was. It was addressed to him personally, not to Resident, and the handwriting on the envelope was someone's actual handwriting, which was unusual enough that he stood at his mailbox in the cold and looked at it for a moment before going inside. The letter was 3 paragraphs. It was not flowery. It said that the writer had been the owner of the property Owen had returned in February, and that she had since learned something of his circumstances, and that she hoped he would accept what was enclosed not as charity, but as a straightforward acknowledgement of its debt. Because she believed when someone does something that costs them and benefits you, you owe them something, and she preferred to pay her debts. The check inside was made out to Penelope Rose Marsh to be used toward medical expenses. The amount was $50,000. Owen sat down on the kitchen floor, not on a chair, on the floor, with his back against the cupboard and his knees up, holding the letter and the check, and he sat there for a long time. He called the number at the bottom of the letterhead the next morning. He had rehearsed what he was going to say. He was going to say he couldn't accept it. He had reasons prepared. Good ones, he thought. It was too much. He didn't know her. Penny had other avenues, other options. They were working on it. He didn't want Penny to grow up thinking things came from nowhere, that you could receive without understanding the weight of what you'd received. The phone rang 4 times and then Vivienne answered and said, "Mr. Marsh." And Owen forgot his reasons. "Mrs. Clark," he said. "I don't." He stopped, started again. "I don't know what to do with this." "I know," she said. "That's why I wrote the letter instead of calling. I figured you'd need some time. I was going to say no. I know that too." He was quiet. She was quiet. "It's for your daughter," she said. "Not for you. I want to be clear about that distinction, because I think you're the kind of person who would find it easier to say no on your own behalf than on hers." Owen looked at the window. A chickadee was sitting on the fence in the backyard. Penny loved chickadees. She called them the tiny loud ones. "That's not a fair thing to say," he said. "No," Vivienne said. "It isn't. But it's true." He didn't say anything to that. I'm not doing this out of guilt, she said. I've thought about it quite a bit, and that's not what it is. I'm doing it because I have more money than I know what to do with, and a daughter of a man I'll never meet returned $82,000 he found on the street when he had every reason in the world to keep it. And I find that I'm unable to simply not respond to that. I don't know how else to put this. I find it clarifying, in a way I haven't experienced in a while. Owen pressed the heel of his hand to his eyes. He was not going to cry on the phone with a stranger. He was not. Can I ask you something? He said. Yes. Why did you follow me? After the police station, I saw your car. There was a pause. I was wondering if you'd noticed that, silver Lexus. You went past my house. Yes, she said, I did. She was quiet for a moment. I wanted to understand why a person does what you did. I thought if I saw where you lived, I'd understand it better. Which is not logical, I realize. Did it work? The bike with training wheels helped, she said. A little, Owen laughed. It surprised him, the laugh and how it felt. Real, like something loosening. Okay, he said. Okay, you'll accept it? Okay, I'll stop arguing, for now. He paused. She's going to ask me where it came from. What will you tell her? He thought about it. I'll tell her someone was grateful. Vivienne was quiet for a moment. That's accurate, she said. He didn't see her again for 2 months. Penny started the new treatment in April. Dr. Pham was cautiously optimistic, which from Dr. Pham was roughly equivalent to anyone else doing cartwheels. Sandra cried on the phone. Owen went to his truck and cried in there, which was becoming a pattern. He thought about Vivienne sometimes, not in any way he could easily categorize. Just, he thought about her, the composure that wasn't quite effortless. The way she'd said clarifying, like it had cost her something to find the word. He called once, in early May, to say that Penny's first follow-up had shown improvement. He thought she'd want to know. He left a voicemail and didn't expect a callback. She called back in 40 minutes. They talked for an hour and 20 minutes. He couldn't have said afterward what they'd talked about. The restructuring at her company, the weird spring they'd had, a book she'd been reading about the history of the Great Lakes, the fact that he'd been trying to teach Penny to ride her bike without the training wheels. And she kept insisting she didn't need to practice because she was already very good at it, despite having fallen twice into the same flower bed. She sounds exactly right, Vivienne said. She's infuriating, Owen said, and could not keep the love out of it. They met in person for the second time in June. It was not orchestrated. Vivienne had come to Hamilton for a site visit at one of her distribution centers, and Owen had texted. They were texting by then, to ask if she had time for coffee, and she'd said yes, and they'd met at a place on Lock Street that had good espresso and mismatched chairs and a chalkboard wall that Penny, had she been there, would have immediately tried to draw on. They sat across from each other and talked, not about the money, not about the bag, about work, about Hamilton, about what it was like to be responsible for something, a child, a company, a father's legacy, and how that responsibility could be the best and most crushing thing about a life simultaneously. Do you ever regret it? Vivienne asked at one point. Owen looked at her. Which part? The bag, turning it in, all of it. He considered the question seriously, the way he did with most things. No, he said. I mean, there were moments, in March, when things got bad. I'd be lying if I said it didn't cross my mind. What if I'd just… He stopped. But then I think about Penny. I think about what I want her to know about how I live my life, and I can't get there from somewhere that starts with pocketing $82,000 I didn't earn. Vivienne was quiet, turning her cup on the table. Do you? He asked. Do I what? Regret it. Writing the check, all of it. She looked at him directly. She had gray eyes. He'd noticed that in the police station, but it registered more now, in the afternoon light through the coffee shop window. No, she said. I think it's the most genuinely useful thing I've done in years. And I run a company with 240 employees. Owen smiled. That's a little alarming. I know, she said. I've thought about it. Penny met Vivienne on a Saturday in late July. Owen hadn't planned it. Vivienne had mentioned offhandedly that she'd never been to the Hamilton waterfront, and Owen had said he was taking Penny down there on Saturday morning because there was a free outdoor concert, and Penny had recently become convinced She enjoyed big music, which she'd seen once at a festival Sandra had taken her to, and which she described as when all the instruments do it together. Vivienne showed up, in jeans and a jacket, which Owen noted because he had not previously seen her in anything other than the charcoal wool coat. She looked, he searched for the word, easier, like something in her had settled. Penny assessed her immediately with the total candor of a 7-year-old. "Your hair has 2 colors," Penny announced. "It does," Vivienne said. "Mine is just 1 color, but my mum said when I'm older it might change. Did yours change when you were older?" "It started changing when I was about 40, Vivienne said. Penny considered this. "That's a long time to wait," she said. "It is," Vivienne agreed, "but it goes by faster than you'd think." Penny seemed to find this acceptable. She turned back to the water. Then she turned back around. "Do you want to see my rocks?" "I would very much like to see your rocks," Vivienne said, and Penny dragged her to the edge of the concert lawn, where she had been curating a small pile of Lake Ontario stones, according to a classification system that she explained at length and with great authority. And Vivienne crouched down and examined each rock with genuine attention, and Owen stood a few feet away and watched and felt something move through him that he didn't try to name right away. He just let it be there. Later, when the concert started and Penny had climbed onto Owen's shoulders to see better, and Vivienne was standing beside them, Penny leaned down and said loudly into Owen's ear, in the way of children who have no concept of volume, "I like her. She listened to all my rocks." Owen caught Vivienne's eye over his daughter's knee. She was trying not to smile and failing. "Yeah," he said. "Me too. There was one more thing. In August, Penny made a drawing. She was going through a phase of drawing pictures for people she liked. She'd made one for Sandra, one for Dr. Pham, one for Eduardo the landlord, who had received it with a solemnity that suggested he understood the honor being conferred. The pictures were abstract in the way that 7-year-old art tends to be, full of color and confident line, and a narrative logic that was entirely internal. She made one for Vivienne. She didn't describe it until Vivienne asked, and then she said, "It's us. You and my dad and me. And the rocks. And the music thing." Vivienne held it carefully. "What's this part?" she asked, pointing to a cluster of bright marks at the top. Penny looked at it seriously. "That's the good feeling," she said. "When everything is good at the same time. I don't know what the word is." "Lucky," Owen offered. Penny shook her head. "Not lucky. Lucky is when something good happens. This is when you made the good happen. It's different." Owen didn't say anything. Vivienne looked at the drawing for a long moment. Then she folded it very carefully and put it in her jacket pocket close to her chest. And Owen watched her do it and understood something he'd been slowly understanding for months. That the person standing in his kitchen on a Tuesday evening, carefully folding a child's drawing into her pocket, like it was the most valuable thing she'd handled all year, was someone who had spent a long time being very competent and very capable and very much in charge of everything, and had quietly forgotten what it felt like to be part of something that didn't need managing. He knew something about that. There are people you meet who arrive in your life through strange doors: a lost bag, a police station, a parking lot, and a silver Lexus going slowly past a house with a bike on the porch. And you can spend a lot of time wondering about the mechanics of it, the coincidence, the what if. What if the bag had landed 3 feet to the left and he'd never caught his boot in the strap? What if she'd been on a different floor of the hotel and never seen the news item? What if he'd driven to work instead? Owen had thought about all of that. He'd thought about it at 3 in the morning when the house was very quiet and Penny was breathing in the next room, and the weight of everything. The money he didn't have, the disease he couldn't fix, the father he still wanted to talk to, sat on him the way it sometimes did, and he'd always come back to the same place. He'd picked up the bag, he'd counted the money. He'd thought about keeping it, really thought about it, and he hadn't. Not because he was a saint, not because it was easy, but because he was Ray Marsh's son, and he'd made his choice, and the choice had made everything that came after it possible. Not the money, though the money mattered. The money bought his daughter time and options and maybe a future that looked different than the one he'd been afraid of. But the other things too. The hour and 20-minute phone call about the Great Lakes. The coffee on Lock Street. The concert on the waterfront, and a 7-year-old explaining rocks with total conviction to a woman in a charcoal wool coat who listened like she had nowhere else to be. The drawing in the pocket, that's when you made the good happen. It's different. He hadn't known, standing in the snow on King Street West with a bag at his feet and $67 in his bank account, that this was where it led. You never know that. You just make the choice in the moment you're standing in, with what you have, for the reasons you have. His father had known that. Had lived it quietly for 31 years, in a city that didn't always make it easy to be decent and kept choosing it anyway. Owen understood now. Some things you receive, some things you return, and some things, the best things, the things that really last, you build slowly, one honest choice at a time, from whatever you happen to find along the way.